This is the H.P. Lovecraft Literary Podcast at hppodcraft.com. I'm Chris Lackey, and with me is Chad Pfeiffer and guest host Kenneth Hite. This week we're doing part 2 of The Rats in the Walls.
I could see that there were thousands of rats.
hppodcraft.com.
Well, so they arrive at the house, the experts, and they pass the night uneventfully. No rats, no tapestries. One of the experts, the psychic researcher you mentioned, says, well,
Thornton.
the rats aren't making noise because he's already been shewn the thing he was meant to be shewn.
Yeah.
So the next day, they go down to the subcellar. 7 guys now.
Yeah.
And a cat.
And a cat.
Typical investigating force.
Uh-huh.
And one of the men, Sir William Brinton, manages to get the altar to tilt backward within an hour.
There's like some unknown counterweight thing, like it's a device that actually tilts up. Yeah.
Right. It's a good thing it's like that, because Lovecraft didn't mention any muscular men.
No, he didn't.
Yeah, no, not this
These
guy.
are all intellectuals here.
There now lay revealed such a horror as would have overwhelmed us had we not been prepared. Through a nearly square opening in the tiled floor, sprawling on a flight of stone steps so prodigiously worn that it was little more than an inclined plane at the center, was a ghastly array of human or semi-human bones. Those which retained their collocation as skeletons showed attitudes of panic fear, and overall were the marks of rodent gnawing. The skulls denoted nothing short of utter idiocy, cretinism, or primitive semi-apedom. Above the hellishly littered steps arched a descending passage seemingly chiseled from the solid rock and conducting a current of air. This current was not a sudden and noxious rush as from a closed vault, but a cool breeze with something of freshness in it. We did not pause long, but shiveringly began to clear a passage down the steps. It was then that Sir William, examining the hewn walls, made the odd observation that the passage, according to the direction of the strokes, must have been chiseled from beneath.
Much more horrific than in the Dutch language.
In the Dutch language.
It is pretty scary, though.
That is pretty creepy,
Yeah,
yeah.
absolutely.
That is definitely worth the italics it's printed in.
Yeah, for sure. Well, they descend deeper into this place, and light. It's actually there's light coming from down below, and the light is from fissures in the cliffside, because now they've descended so far that they're actually to the limestone cliffs, and there were cracks, but from the outside you couldn't really make out that they led to anywhere.
Yeah.
But in here, it's kind of giving a creepy illumination to this place.
I like that the protagonist says,
I must be very deliberate now and choose my words.
that little sentence set apart. He's freaking out. And he's saying, I gotta choose my words, like, this has scared the frosting out of Lovecraft. He's going to tell you exactly what's going on now. He's freaked out. And of course, as you say, they keep descending, and this is what they see.
It was a twilit grotto of enormous height, stretching away farther than any eye could see. A subterraneous world of limitless mystery and horrible suggestion. There were buildings and other architectural remains. In one terrified glance, I saw a weird pattern of tumuli, a savage circle of monoliths, a low-domed Roman ruin, a sprawling Saxon pile, and an early English edifice of wood. But all these were dwarfed by the ghoulish spectacle presented by the general surface of the ground. For yards about, the steps extended an insane tangle of human bones, or bones at least as human as those on the steps. Like a foamy sea they stretched, some fallen apart, but others wholly or partly articulated as skeletons. These latter invariably in postures of demoniac frenzy, either fighting off some menace or clutching other forms with cannibal intent.
This is a pretty insane picture he's painting here.
Yeah.
Like it's this huge underground cavern that has buildings in it. And they're buildings from all these different historical periods, that kind of correspond with the legends that we've heard before. And there's just bones everywhere. That's crazy.
Yeah, if I were an artist, I would be painting this every day. I mean, there's so much detail. It's amazing. Like a foamy sea they stretched.
Yeah.
Well, and when the anthropologist looks at the skulls, he gets confused because just like, there being all these time periods of houses, there's some that are highly developed, but some that almost look Neanderthal.
Yeah.
Well,
he mentions the Piltdown Man.
Yeah, he mentions the Piltdown
Man
again.
Because the Piltdown Man wasn't shown as a hoax until after Lovecraft died, I believe.
That's correct, yeah.
Yeah.
And the bones are all gnawed by rats. Some of the skeletons have even... This causes one of the guys to faint.
Yeah.
But some of the skeletons have even devolved to a point where they're quadrupeds. In fact, they deduce, after they've examined this long enough, that these quadruped things were held in stone pens and they were overfed to a fatness by those vats of coarse vegetables.
Right,
Probably corn.
Yeah.
Very typical. One of the guys is actually translating as they're going through here, and he's translating some of the diet facts, some of the things that were going on down here, some of the gastronomic details, which people are not happy about. And Norris goes into the English building, and he comes out telling them that it's a butcher shop and a kitchen in there.
Yeah.
And with some pretty recent tools inside, which is what freaks him out.
Yeah.
He says there's some graffiti from as recent as 1610.
What's going on? It looks like that the people in this weird little town that's hidden underneath the priory is like cannibal Jersey. It's where people just people just go down there and they, there's a butcher shop set up. You can go down and buy some human or semi-human flesh and eat it, and maybe
I don't know what was going on.
Maybe one of those buildings was a cafe, and they would,
Well, it doesn't say that there's a cafe, but they do seem to be repurposing some of the buildings. I mean, they've got. He says later that they use the Saxon pile as a cell, as a prison to imprison people that they want to eat, which I guess are special people because one of them has the Delapore arms on a finger ring.
Oh, right.
Right.
Yes. Uh-huh.
So they are repurposing these buildings that have been around for possibly 10,000 years. He speculates.
Oh.
So who can say? Yes, perhaps a cafe. Certainly, they're using some of it to worship Kybele and Addis, like they said previously.
And you need caffeine for that.
Yeah. You could do that in a cafe.
Well, I was thinking of some cannibal beat poets and stuff. You know what I mean? That would come up in
exactly. I love this sentence, or these couple of sentences.
Through all this horror, my cat stalked unperturbed. Once I saw him monstrously perched atop a mountain of bones, and wondered at the secrets that might lie behind his yellow eyes.
So while all of his companions are fainting, this cat with the terrible name is a total badass. He's just he's striking picturesque kind of stances on top of the bones.
It's
to him, this is awesome.
Unperturbed.
Yeah. So they look down into these giant pits that are full of bones, and Delapore realizes that, well, this is where the rats scrambled from in that horrible, when the rats overran the land and ate all the sheep and the hogs and the people.
Right.
They poured out of these pits and into the countryside because the pits weren't getting filled up anymore.
Right.
With bodies.
Right.
Then there came a sound from that inky, boundless farther distance that I thought I knew. And I saw my old black cat dart past me like a winged Egyptian god, straight into the illimitable gulf of the unknown. But I was not far behind, for there was no doubt after another second. It was the eldritch scurrying of those fiend-born rats, always questing for new horrors, and determined to lead me on even unto those grinning caverns of Earth's center, where Nyarlathotep, the mad, faceless god, howls blindly to the piping of two amorphous, idiot flute players.
This reference surprised me. It's like Lovecraft must have known that we were going to have Kenneth on the show again.
Yeah, somehow he knew. Somehow we do. But it's funny because he mentions the blind flute players, which is generally associated with Azathoth and not Nyarlathotep.
Yeah.
I think Lovecraft is still probably just working out his mythos, maybe?
Since this is the first mention of Nyarlathotep after the story Nyarlathotep, in which he's the showman, the electrical showman,
right.
And now we've presented him as an idiot god. I think Lovecraft is basically sort of figuring out his symbolic cosmology, and he knows that there is the center of everything is a blind idiot, right? He knows that, and that's true whether it's Nyarlathotep or it's Azathoth. Mm-hmm. And in this version, you know that it's at the center of the Earth, not the center of the universe.
Right.
So this is kind of before his Copernican revolution, and he's still burrowing down into the underworld like he was in the Nameless City, and like he was in the Festival, and like he in a lot of these early stories, especially. There's these this sort of secondary world that's got its own light source, and it's got buildings in it, and often it's full of devolved people. And he's got some implication that further down there are more horrible mysteries yet. He talks about the Stygian pit that no one ever looked into.
Right.
He talks about later on in the Mound, he talks about how there's a gulfs even beneath Kenyan that Yoth and Zan and things like that. And the whole Dream Quest takes place in kind of this underworld / dream world. And so this is something that I think Lovecraft is trying to work out. Is the center of everything? Is the center of madness? Is it the middle of the Earth, or is it the middle of the cosmos? He hasn't really started looking up at the stars yet in this at this point. Although he does to an extent with Wall of Sleep and Polaris. Obviously, there's some stars.
Right.
Sure. There.
He doesn't go too far. He's still looking from the Earth up into the stars.
Right.
The stars, though. Yeah. Then Delapore, runs off despite losing light. He runs off into these depths and these dark pits, and not into the pits, but off into the darkness, and
away from everybody else.
The text kind of here devolves with the character's mind.
Yeah, it starts getting pretty crazy, and he starts not really making a lot of sense.
Something bumped into me. Something soft and plump. It must have been the rats. The vicious, gelatinous, ravenous army that feast on the dead and the living. Why shouldn't rats eat a Delapore as a Delapore eats forbidden things? The war ate my boy, damn them all. And the Yanks ate Carfax with flames and burnt Grandsire Delapore in secret. No, I tell you, I am not that demon swineherd in the Twilight Grotto. It was not Edward Norris's fat face on that flabby fungus thing. Who says I am a Delapore? He lived, but my boy died. Shall a Norris hold the lands of a Delapore? It's voodoo, I tell you. That spotted snake. Curse you, Thornton. I'll teach you to fate at what my family do. Splud, thou stinkard. I'll learn ye how to ghost. Won't ye swank me till twice? Magna Mater, Magna Mater. Atis, dia adayadin. Agus pas dunach art. Donas is dolas art. Agus letsa. That is what they say I said when they found me in the blackness after 3 hours. Found me crouching in the blackness over the plump, half-eaten body of Captain Norris, with my own cat leaping and tearing at my throat. Now they have blown up Exham Priory and shut me into this barred room at Hanwell with fearful whispers about my heredity and experiences. When I speak of poor Norris, they accuse me of a hideous thing. But they must know that I did not do it. They must know it was the rats. The slithering, scurrying rats whose scampering will never let me sleep. The demon rats that race behind the padding in this room and beckon me down to greater horrors than I have ever known. The rats they can never hear. The rats in the walls.
And that is the end.
That is the end.
You know what I think's really cool about that is he kind of rolls in his lost son. Like that comes into it, and the fact that Norris lived and he died, and it
really personalizes it.
Yeah, and it sort of makes it maybe he's not just totally crazy. I mean, obviously he is crazy, but there is some resentment that he had.
Yeah,
and is kind of showing through, and maybe that's why Norris got the chomp instead of any of the other guys.
Well, yeah, but I mean, also there's an implication that Norris is related to the flabby fungus white things that they were feasting on.
Oh, right.
Right.
Oh, right.
Am I wrong about that?
Yeah, no.
Well, because Norris would have been from the families around the area, where the Delapores would have been, harvesting their cannibals. Not their cannibals, but their flocks, I guess.
Yeah. So, it was good enough. My family liked eating this. I'm going to give it a shot.
And also there's the whole, I mean, when you say that Norris lived and his son died, there's the whole thing where the Norrises get to flourish on the Delapor's land, right? That the Delapor's have been cut off, again, literally without issue. They don't have anything left in Britain after the 11th Earl flees to Virginia, and then when our narrator comes back, his son is already dead, so there aren't going to be any more Delapores, but we can assume that there's, whole tons of Norrises all over the place, all plump and sleek and self-satisfied.
Ugh. And man, that just really lends. It's great that he, you get the detail about him losing his son, and then it's great that it comes back, and it really justifies his descent into madness so quickly. I mean, he really has a lot weighing on his mind.
Yeah. There's a lot of background on this. Of course,
I don't believe it.
There is. It was written in August or September of 1923 and was first published in Weird Tales in 24.
And that's it.
That's it. No, that's not it.
It doesn't sound like a lot of background when you put it that way.
Supposedly, the idea for this story came from Lovecraft's commonplace book, and he was just in bed one night, and the wallpaper creaked, and came off, and it just kind of freaked him out a little bit. And he wrote down that this is probably a good idea for something. And I think later on he wrote another little plot germ in one of his book, which was Horrible Secret in Crypt of Ancient Castle, Discovered by Dweller. And,
Yeah.
So maybe those things have something to do with this story, maybe not. But also, that little bit of Gaelic at the end of the story, when he kind of breaks down into that language, he lifted that from this Fiona MacLeod's The Sin Eater, which is in Gaelic.
Right.
Which means God against thee and in thy face, and may a death of woe be yours, evil and sorrow to thee and thine.
Yeah, so he just lifted it right out of that.
Yeah. But later on, Lovecraft wrote to Frank Long. The only objection to that phrase is that it's Gaelic instead of Cymric, as the south of England's local demands. But with anthropology, details don't count. Nobody will ever stop to note the difference, is what he said.
Did you stop to note the difference?
I did stop to note the difference, but only because Lovecraft noted the difference.
Right.
And more importantly, or at least as importantly, Robert E. Howard noted the difference.
Yes, he did.
When it was republished in Weird Tales in 1930, Robert E. Howard wrote a snarky letter to the editor, like you'd write to Marvel comics explaining why Spider-Man was on the wrong building or whatever. And,
what was the prize?
He said that obviously what's going on is that there's a secret Gaelic subculture underneath this Cymric stratum, and that's what he's referring to.
Wow.
And so then Lovecraft writes back, and they discover that they have, that they're best friends, brothers.
So that's when their relationship kind of starts, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Because he was much younger than Lovecraft was. Robert E. Howard. He was 10 years younger than he was?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
I'm not exactly sure.
Yeah, no, I'm for sure because I remember when we first brought up Howard early on, he was only 14 years old when Lovecraft wrote one of his earlier stories. So he's definitely much younger.
But this was actually the correspondence, or his letter to the editor was what started their correspondence?
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
I do that Robert E. Howard had
that he was the one
that he chimed in on that.
Yeah.
But
for Marvel Con, what do you get when you point out inconsistencies? Is it a no prize?
You get a no prize.
Yeah, no
prize.
prize. Yeah.
Right.
There was some good. This is a tangent, and then we'll probably cut it. But there was this great no prize issue they used to do. Every year, they would compile all of the mistakes they would make, and it was just. I remember one of them. The Thing was going to fight some bad villain, and he said, "Only one of us is going to be walking out of here, and it ain't going to be me." and that was, somebody caught it and wrote in, and then they put in there. And there was another one where there was this guy who was a pirate, and he had a patch over one eye, and he was looking at his periscope in one panel, and the next panel he's looking away but still holding the periscope, and then you could see that his patched eye was over the periscope thing that he was looking through. I loved those so much when I was a kid. I mean, they did it every year. They would publish just a compilation of all of their blunders, kind of a blooper reel for comic books and
That's
stuff.
the gag reel of comics.
So Ken, you also you did a little research on this one recently.
Yes, because I knew I would be summoned up to be guesting on it.
Yes,
the summoning worked.
That's right. So I went back and reread the Stephen Mariconda essay, Baring Gould and the Ghouls, which talks about Sabine Baring Gould's Curious Myths of the Middle Ages, which is a book that we know that Lovecraft owned and read, and which details, as you might expect, a number of curious myths of the Middle Ages. But two of the ones that Mariconda thinks are specifically associated with this is one called St. Patrick's Purgatory, which is about a mysterious monastery or abbey that is somewhere in Ireland that has a cavern underneath it that leads down into purgatory. And if you go down into the vaults underneath that monastery, you hear the torments of the damned, and you get to see all the horrible things that are happening to the people in purgatory.
Now, there was a bunch of rats involved in that story too, wasn't there?
In that one there isn't.
No, there isn't.
But there is another one of the curious myths called the story of Bishop Hatto.
Right.
And Bishop Hatto is a very bad bishop who gets so steamed that the poor are getting on his case to be fed during a famine, that he invites them all into his barn and burns them alive.
Right.
And having done that, he then goes back home, brushing his hands off, good
Happy
deed,
with
well
himself.
done, and sits down, and when he wakes up, he's awakened, in fact, by his cat in the story. And when he looks and sees what's got his cat so upset, his whole bedroom is full of rats.
Yeah. And they devour him, right?
And then they devour him.
Yeah.
Yes, indeed they do.
That's
they,
what you get.
They what's the thing? They have whetted their teeth against the stones, and now they pick the bishop's bones. They gnawed the flesh from every limb, for they were sent to do judgment on him.
Oh.
Yes.
Yeah. So that's
pretty pretty intense.
It's definitely intense, and I could see where Lovecraft got a little inspiration from that. But I think the Rats of the Walls is a different type of story, because the protagonist is kind of the monster again. This is a sort of a turnaround, where it's not he really didn't do anything wrong.
No, all he did was commit the standard Lovecraftian sin of researching your family history.
Right. Right. Being descended from people that
If there's one thing I've learned from Lovecraft is don't study.
Don't study, that's right. Don't do any archaeology, don't do any history, nothing like that.
Don't do that.
Well, also, there's no rats in the story. I mean, that you hear them.
Oh, right, yeah.
And when he even physically describes them, and he's in the dark.
Right.
And maybe he's feeling them, maybe not.
And there's the bones have rat gnaw marks on them.
So there's lots of evidence of rats.
But there's no actual rats. Yeah.
Right.
And then did you say you checked out some of Irvin Cobb's story?
I looked at it a long time ago when I wrote George Lovecraft. I didn't do it recently for this. It's not a very good story, I don't think. And it's certainly, the payoff. There's a Sherlock Holmes story called The Yellow Face, in which the big surprise is that someone has a black member of their family, and it's like, oh God, Conan Doyle. Thanks for sharing. And this is the same sort of thing where the guy, dies in a train accident, I think it is, or he's hit by a truck, and he shouts out something, and it turns out, big surprise, that he had, African blood, dun dun dun.
Right.
And that's why he shouted an African.
Right.
But it was
utterance which is the same utterance that his African ancestor had uttered when he was,
hit by a rhino
after us or something.
Yeah, he was charged over by a rhino ran over him.
And again, when you look at that basic at that story, and you compare it, Rats on the Walls is practically ACLU material compared to that.
Oh right, yeah, absolutely. Oh dear.
How funny. Well, we're all descended from Africans.
We're all descended from Africans, yeah. So that's a problem.
That's right. As long as they're not fiendish white apes from the Congo.
Yeah, we're okay.
Yeah. We're all good.
Watch out for those guys.
Yeah.
Jeez Louise.
When I read it at the again when I was rereading everything for Toward Lovecraft, and I read it, it suddenly came in on me so strongly that this is very much Lovecraft's response to Fall of the House of Usher, in the same way that his Dunwich Horror is a response to Great God Pan by Machen, and that Sarnath is a response to Dunsany. That he's taking that Poe model of a house the collapse simultaneously of the physical house and of the lineage that lives there, and all of the parallels of the fact that it's an auditory a phantasm, that it's something you hear, and it's something that only the member of the house can really hear, and everyone else is just reacting to him. There's so many Poe parallels and so much. Reading both this and Usher together, I think you get a lot more out of Rats on the Walls than you do if you treat it as its own thing. And not that it's not worthy of being treated as its own thing, but it's so clearly Lovecraft's great final, thanks for all the fish to Edgar Allan Poe.
Well, that sounds like a great goth weekend. Read Usher. Read Rats on the Walls.
Yeah. Listen to your Sisters of Mercy CDs. And,
right. Hang out down there with all your nauseous musical instruments like in The Hound.
Yeah, smoke some cloves.
Nauseous, exactly. Pipe in the smell of the graveyard.
The smell of the graveyard, yeah.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Ken, I want to say thank you again. Your input is always amazing, and it makes me wonder how off we are normally on our podcast.
It makes me wonder how have we gotten this far. We half glimpsed truths about Lovecraft.
We love having you on the show, and hopefully you'll be back again.
I would love to come back again. I always love doing your podcast, and I think it's great fun. And if you're worried, I almost never listen to the podcast and think, "Oh no, they've got it all wrong."
Oh, good.
We try to stay away from facts. That's basically how we do it. I also want to say thanks again to Andrew Lehman.
Andrew, always a pleasure. Doing a great job.
For dealing with some very difficult passages of text.
Yeah.
Thanks for getting through all of that. And with that, I'm Chad Pfeiffer.
I'm Chris Lackey.
I'm Kenneth Hite.
And this has been the H.P. Lovecraft Literary Podcast.
At hppodcraft.com.
hppodcraft.com.
There we go.